That vote is playing out less than a week before the issue hits the Supreme Court after much of the president's trade war was deemed illegal by lower courts following a case brought by a coalition of state attorneys general, led by the Attorney General of Oregon, Dan Rayfield, who is with us live right now. Mr. Rayfield, good to see you again. Thank you very much for making the time.
Yeah, great to see you too.
Do you think that Donald Trump's decision to cut off talks with this country had something to do with the upcoming hearing at the Supreme Court?
I really think that it was a matter of hurt feelings. It was truly the behavior of a toddler and not the behavior of an adult who's leading the country, the United States. It was absolutely wild to just be personally offended by something you see on TV and then have it impact the rationality with which that you're going to engage in international trade talks. But that's the type of president that we have right now, incredibly thin-skinned in the way that he deals with issues right now.
What do you make of congressional support in the form of two different things? First, what we just spelled out happened in the Senate overnight, but also a sort of bipartisan brief that was sent to the Supreme Court, essentially advocating in favor of the stance that you and your colleagues have taken.
Yeah, first and foremost, Congress should never have had to act in the first place. The president does not have the constitutional authority to do what he is doing right now. He doesn't have statutory authority to do what he's doing right now, and that has been upheld in two levels of courts, and next week will be in the United States Supreme Court arguing that. But the mere fact that Congress felt compelled to act says a lot in our country. It says that people are listening to common sense economics. It says that people are listening to, frankly, the former president. President Ronald Reagan, the standard bearer for the American Republican Party, in what he talked about, how free trade benefits multiple countries. It keeps prices lower. So you start to see some of his own party getting really anxious, which I think is really normal because you got Thanksgiving around the bend. You've got Christmas around the bend. You've got grocery bills going up in the United States. Right now, one of the biggest headlines is the cost of beef is going through the roof because of the actions that the president is taking.
What is your sense of, and I ask sort of your sense of where public sentiment is on this, and you're seeing some, as you point out, manifestations of opposition, but we, I think, here in Canada have been surprised, or were surprised initially into the first number of months of his presidency at how little opposition there appeared to be versus, let's say, in the first round of NAFTA negotiations when we had a lot of allies advocating for the benefits, the mutual benefits of free trade. Do you sense a shift at all in public sentiment, and ultimately, do you think that will be reflected in additional pressure on the president?
Yeah, and I want to pivot what you said a little bit. There are some people who are just going to agree with whatever the president says, just like you'd probably have some Democrats that will agree with whatever a Democratic president says. What I would tell you, the most unpopular thing through polling across all Americans is how Trump is handling our economy and tariffs. And the reason why is just common sense, right? When you go to the grocery store, you see your prices increase. When you go to back to school supplies, you see your prices increase. When you start going to buy new clothes for your family and you see the prices increase, that's just flat unpopular. And right now, we have an affordability crisis, I think, across the world, but really in America as well, as the haves and have-not gap continues to widen. And this is a policy that is exacerbating that. At the same time, mind you, this same president is yanking back benefits on food benefits, food assistance for the most neediest people, and healthcare benefits. So this stuff is really hitting home for all Americans, and it doesn't matter who they are, Republicans or Democrats. You're seeing that really resonate, and that's why I think you're seeing some Republicans start to defect, and that is why this issue has just grown to be a monstrous economic problem for the president.
I wanted to get sort of some detail on the legal aspect of all of this, of course, what you will be arguing before the Supreme Court. The president has used something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to justify his application or the levying of these tariffs. What is your legal argument against him doing that?
Yeah, in legal arguments, sometimes you start thinking this is really complicated, right? But it's not. This is one of the most simple cases. Specifically, every president in the history of the United States has used a specific set of statutes that are really geared towards giving the president a little bit of power with sideboards to administer tariffs. This president didn't use those statutes. He was the first president to ever use an emergency power that had never been used to set tariffs to do this. It's really specific. The language of that statute doesn't give the president power to do tariffs. And that's why the two lower courts agreed with us in our arguments.
If you are successful before the Supreme Court, do you ultimately think it will put a stop to the use of these tariffs, the kind of tariff regime that the president is employing, or do you anticipate he'll find other ways to apply them?
Yeah, we've got a president who's living in archaic economic times, the times of like the early 1900s when people thought tariffs were a good idea. So I fully anticipate that his archaic beliefs on how the modern economy is run are going to persist into the future. And I think he'll try and be creative on how to implement tariffs. However, if the courts uphold our lawsuit and rule with us, it is going to put the appropriate sideboards on, the sideboards that Congress put in place, which really limit the duration, they limit how high they can be. And so these really effective sideboards that will not wreck the relationships between countries. It will require factual findings. It will have reviews. It will be thoughtful when you do these things. If we can get the president back to using the statutes that Congress intended, that's going to be good for all nations.
Are there also potential refund liabilities? Like, for example, if you are successful, will the state of Oregon be able to sue the federal government to get money back?
Yeah, these are things that go on. You think about it, what you teach your kids, right? If I told my son, don't throw the baseball near the window, and I tell him it 5 times, and on the 6th time he throws the baseball near the window and he breaks it, that is his responsibility. When Trump was told over and over again by multiple judges, probably by his own lawyers, to be honest, that what you're doing is not constitutional, you have to be responsible for that. Businesses should not have to bear the burden of a president who's unwilling to follow the law in our country. And he should reimburse those companies because they deserve it. A lot of companies in Canada, in the United States, across the world, don't have the biggest margins to be able to afford these things. And that's why it's going to be so important to make sure that we keep our businesses whole. It's good for our economy. It's good for jobs. And frankly, it will keep the prices that all of us pay down.
The president has finally, Mr. Rayfield, mused about showing up in court this week. What are your thoughts on that? And ultimately, do you think it has anything to do with trying to up pressure on the court?
Of course, this is a president who, loves his community theater, and that's, what I would call it. This is not professional theater. This is community theater. He would have given me a run for my money when I tried community theater at a younger age. But this is what he does. He's coming into an independent branch of government, our judiciary, trying to push his weight around, trying to flex his muscle. And that is not what an executive power should ever do. And that's why no other president in the history of this country has ever tried to do that. But this isn't the first time. This is a president, he whines and complains more than my dog at the dinner table on Thanksgiving when he doesn't get his way. And he will sit there and he will threaten judges' impeachment if he doesn't like the ruling that they're getting. That is not what you do. Democracies are founded on having an independent judiciary, a check and a balance on both Congress and the president. So I'm patently offended that any president would even consider coming in and trying to influence the decision of an independent judiciary. That is not a democracy. That is not how things run. And I really hope that he has a little bit more common sense than walking into that courtroom on Wednesday.
Are you worried he might be successful in trying to do that?
If he comes in to the courtroom, he is an American. He gets to, and if he can find a seat appropriately to be in that courtroom, that's the choice he gets to make. What I think is that there are certain lines that we draw in the sand of a healthy democracy or republic, and that is a line that would be crossed by the president. I don't think any member of Congress, any politician, any president, or frankly, anyone in any community should be pressuring the judiciary to make a decision one way or the other. This is a place for facts. It is a place to apply law sterilely to get the right decision for all Americans. It is not a place to throw your political weight around. And frankly, I think it could backfire on him. If I was a justice, even if I was a more conservative justice, and I saw a president trying to influence the decision, that is what dictators do. that is exactly how it would reflect to me if I was sitting up on that bench, and I would be offended.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Mr. Rayfield, appreciate your time and your insights this evening very much. Thank you.
Thank you.